Friends, colleagues have always been there for me and my family when we've gone through very tough times. And I mean it sincerely. Been there on our doorstep, in our home, with us. They taught us so much about the optimistic spirit of the Jewish people. Above all, they taught me one thing. We can never lose hope. Hope, hope, hope. I've seen the power of that hope in my own life and in the life of our nation. Next week, you'll light the 8 candles in your menorahs. My final Hanukkah message to you is this. As president, this is to hold on to that hope.
That was President Biden, the nation's second Catholic president, talking about his connection to the Jewish community at the White House's Hanukkah celebration last week. And this year, the Festival of Lights begins in 2 days, the same as Christmas night. This is the first time since 2005 that the start of Hanukkah coincides with the Christmas holiday, and only the 4th time ever that this has happened since 1900. Joining us now, Senior Rabbi of Congregation B'nai Jeshurun and in Short Hills, New Jersey, Rabbi Matthew Gurwitz, and Bishop of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester in Minnesota, Bishop Robert Barron. He is also the founder of Word on Fire, a non-profit Catholic media organization. Bishop, let me start with you. I went to a service of lessons and carols, a lovely one actually, at St. John's in Lafayette Square outside the White House that I hadn't been to. And maybe it was because I was in Lafayette Square outside the White House that I started thinking during this service about power. And it struck me that there was a lot in the tale of Jesus. We focus on the birth of Jesus, but there is in some ways a lot there about power as well. The power of Jesus coming into the world with the Son of God, but also it's so much talk about King Herod and the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus, of course, who felt he had the political power on his side. And was I off beam there thinking about this during a beautiful service of lessons and carols? But it made me think about what the Christmas story is about in other ways.
Yeah, I think you're reading it correctly. One of the dangers is we sentimentalize Christmas, and it's born of looking at, 10,000 Christmas cards. But the Christmas story is properly subversive. In Luke's great account, it begins, as you say, by evoking Caesar Augustus, Quirinius, the governor of Syria, so these kind of high and mighty political figures. And that's the way most stories and poems in the ancient world would begin. They're talking about important people. But then see, Luke pulls the rug out from under us because the story isn't about Augustus or Quirinius. It's about this little nobody couple making their way to, from a Roman perspective, a little dusty nothing city of Bethlehem. But then it unfolds as a contrast between Caesar Augustus in his palace in Rome and this baby king. No place to lay his head. He's born in a stable, wrapped in swaddling clothes. He's not feeding himself, but placed in a manger. It's meant to contrast sharply with Augustus. But here's the kicker, really. Augustus was the most powerful man in the world because he had the largest army. But in the Christmas story, what appears is an army of angels. And the word in Greek there means army. We say host or we say multitude of angels, but the word is army. And the point is, but the baby king representing God's power is greater than the power of Caesar Augustus. And then the Gospels unfold as the telling of that story. So you're quite right in sensing something very subversive in the story.
So, Rabbi, Hanukkah, as noted, is just a few days away as well. Talk to us about what sort of lessons or comfort or inspiration you hope people draw from that holiday this year in particular, what has been such a hard year for so many, particularly those of the Jewish faith.
Yeah, this has been an incredibly rough 18 months. With October 7th, we have over 100 hostages still in the tunnels of Gaza, and of course an increase of anti-Semitism. Both of us are sports fans, so in a circuitous way I want to answer your question. I'm very devoted to sports, but I have a penchant for picking horrible teams. And I don't want to ruin all the reputations, but let's just say the word New York Jets. That should say it all.
It does.
But we've learned from supporting teams like that is that talent is assessed on paper, but the games are played on the field. And sometimes great miracles happen. And 2,200 years ago, there was a king named Antiochus who wanted everyone in his kingdom, all his subjects, to dress like him, eat like him, and pray like him. he comes across someone named Judah Maccabee, a great figure in Jewish history, who said, sorry, I don't conform. And the Greco-Romans said, we're going to have a problem. And military conflict ensues. And on paper, there's no way Maccabee and his ragtag team could ever win. But it doesn't manifest on paper, it does in the field. Miraculously, they win. They go to the temple, the great temple, which has now been vilified, has been pillaged, and they have to repurify it. And they go back and they have one vial of oil there for the process, not nearly enough. But that one vial lasts 8 days. It becomes the 8 days of Hanukkah. We bring all the light into the world. But what we learn is that ultimately, especially in days like this, we cannot conform and be like everyone else. We have to triple down on our identities, being who we are, caring about who we are, but also reaching out to other communities, especially during a week where Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa all come together.
And that idea of that light and that hope, it's miracles, but it also requires doing the work.
I love that you say that, because miracles are not magic. There's a combination of the divine and human messengers. Bringing light into the world means feeding the homeless. Bringing light into the world means somehow clothing the naked. Bringing light in the world means freeing the oppressed, and again, being who we are ultimately. With God as the wind at our back, in partnership, we can bring light during days that are so physically dark, but also metaphorically dark these days.
Leave us with a Christmas message for those of us who have had a long, exhausting year, many who are suffering around the world, but particularly in this country as well. What is your moment? What are the things that you feel hopeful and optimistic about as we enter this Christmas period?
I'll tell you one thing is, I think this revival of interest in religion. So the last 20 years, there's been a lot of disaffiliation from the churches. A lot of people have stopped going to church, the increasing secularization. But some of the indicators now say that that's perhaps stopping and even reversing a bit. There's a renewed interest in the Bible, a renewed interest in worship. And there I'd pick up the rabbi's point about Hanukkah, because the rededication of the temple over and against a hostile culture, that's a very important metaphor for our own time. When our very secularizing culture can be hostile to the churches, it's time for us to rededicate the temple. You know, I'll say this too. The one thing a Christian can never consistently be is anti-Semitic. It's simply out of step with Christianity, because Christianity is grounded in, based upon, related to in every detail, Judaism. You open before you get to the Christmas story in Matthew's gospel, you got to go through the genealogy of Jesus, which lays out his lengthy and detailed Jewish heritage. And so there's a sign of hope too, I think, the coming together of Christianity and Judaism. We see that in a fresh way.
Yeah, this year, of course, that exceptional year where the two start at the same time. Bishop Robert Barron and Rabbi Matthew Gurwitz, thank you so much for joining us, both of you, on this Christmas week. Also this week, by the way, Kwanzaa, as we mentioned, the nationally recognized celebration of African culture and community in the United States since its founding in 1966. Kwanzaa begins on Thursday. The non-religious holiday spans 7 days through New Year's Day. The celebration emerged during the Black Freedom Movement as a way to reconnect Black communities in the U.S. with important African cultural traditions that were severed by the transatlantic slave trade. So everybody celebrates.